No filler, just pure thriller. Get your daily dose of intense, high-quality narratives and cinematic excellence that pushes the boundaries of digital media. We tell the stories that stick with you. Click subscribe now and join our growing community today. The first time my husband called me sweetheart in that particular tone, I didn't recognize it for what it was. It was a Tuesday evening in early October, and I was standing in our kitchen in Ashford Hills, still wearing my coat, still holding the grocery bags, because I had come straight from the office and stopped at the store on the way home. I had been at work since 7 that morning. It was now past 7 at night. He was sitting at the island with a glass of bourbon, scrolling through something on his phone. He didn't look up. "Dinner's late," he said. "I just walked in," I said. "I know when you walked in, sweetheart." That was it. That was the whole exchange. I put the groceries down, took off my coat, and started cooking. I told myself he had a hard day. I told myself I was being too sensitive. I had been telling myself those things for 4 years, and I had gotten very good at it. My name is Diane. I am 41 years old. I am a licensed architect. I was, for 11 years, the wife of a man named Marshall, who is a corporate attorney at one of the most respected firms in our state, whose name appears on plaques in the lobby of the county courthouse, whose photograph smiles from the firm's website next to words like integrity and excellence and community. I want to tell you what happened inside that house on Birchwood Lane, behind the manicured hedges and the restored front door we were featured in a local design magazine for. I want to tell you because I spent a long time thinking I was the only one, and I know now that I was not. We met when I was 29. He was 37. He was charming in the way that certain men are charming completely, deliberately, with a focus that feels like sunlight when it is pointed at you. He remembered details. He asked follow-up questions. On our third date, he remembered that I had mentioned my grandmother's name in passing and he used it in a sentence 6 weeks later. And I remember thinking, who does that? Who pays that kind of attention? I know now. Men who are building a case. We were married in the spring. I left the architecture firm I had been at for 5 years because Marshall's firm was relocating to Ashford Hills, and the firm I was at didn't have an office there, and we talked about it like it was a mutual decision. Like it was obvious. Like of course I would be the one to leave. I told myself I could find something new. I told myself it was an adventure. I found a position at a small local firm within a few months. Marshall seemed pleased. He told his colleagues his wife was an architect. He said it the way someone might say their house had a wine cellar as a feature, not a person. The small corrections began in the second year. Not arguments. Corrections. The way I loaded the dishwasher. The way I spoke to the dry cleaner. The way I laughed too loudly at a dinner party. The way I had ordered for myself at a restaurant before he had a chance to look at the menu. Each one delivered quietly, privately, often in the car on the way home from some event, in that tone of patient disappointment that made me feel I was always one step behind a standard I couldn't quite see. "I just think you could be more aware of how you come across," he would say. Or, "People at my level notice these things, Diane." Or, most often, "I'm only telling you because I want you to succeed." By our 5th year, I had left the firm. I told myself it was because I wanted to focus on us, on the house, on building something together. The truth, which I could not look at directly at the time, was that I had lost the ability to trust my own judgment about anything, including my own work. I volunteered. I sat on the board of the Ashford Hills Arts Foundation. I organized Marshall's client dinners. I learned the names of his partners' wives and their children's ages and their dietary restrictions. I became very good at being the right kind of woman in the right kind of room. Marshall thanked me, occasionally, in the way you thank a hotel for a comfortable stay. The evening everything changed was a Friday in March. There was a fundraiser for the County Historical Society, held at the Hargrove Estate, one of those events where the wine is excellent and everyone is performing a version of themselves they have spent decades perfecting. I had organized the seating, I had arranged the centerpieces. I had confirmed the caterer 3 times. Marshall's firm was the presenting sponsor. He was in his element moving through the room, hand on shoulders, voice carrying just the right distance. I was doing what I had learned to do, staying close enough to be useful, far enough not to crowd him. And then I saw her. Her name was Renata. She worked at the firm. I had met her once at a holiday party, briefly, and Marshall had introduced her as one of the associates. She was standing near the bar, and when Marshall crossed the room toward her, something passed between them in the half-second before he noticed I was watching. Something that had a shape and a history. I know what I saw. I want to be precise about that. I am an architect. I read space and structure for a living. What I saw was two people who knew each other in a way that had nothing to do with the firm. I said nothing that night. On the drive home, Marshall told me I had been too familiar with the caterer. That I had laughed at something the caterer said and it had looked unprofessional. That people at the firm noticed these things. I nodded. I said, I understand. And something very quiet shifted inside me. I did not confront him. I want to be clear about this, because I know it might seem like the obvious thing to do. But I had spent enough time in that house to know that confronting Marshall without evidence was not a conversation. It was a trial, and I would lose. He was a litigator. He was very, very good at it. Instead, I started paying attention in a different way. I have a friend named Carol. We met on the Arts Foundation board 6 years ago. She is 62, silver-haired. And she was a forensic accountant for 30 years before she retired. She is one of the sharpest people I have ever known. And she is also one of the only people in Ashford Hills I trusted completely, because she had no interest in any of the social arrangements that held that town together. I called her the following Monday morning, from my car, parked 3 blocks from our house. I told her what I had seen. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How are the finances set up?" That was when I realized I didn't fully know. In the early years, we had a joint account. Gradually, over time, Marshall had moved things to simplify, he said, to protect, he said. My name was still on the house. My name was still on some accounts. But the architecture of our financial life, I realized, sitting in that car, had been quietly renovated without me, the way you might renovate a room while the other person is sleeping. Carol said, "Get a lawyer before you do anything else. And get someone who is not connected to anyone Marshall knows." Her name was Patricia Holloway, and she practiced family law in a city 2 hours away. Carol found her. I drove there on a Wednesday afternoon, telling Marshall I was meeting with a potential vendor for an upcoming foundation event. Patricia was direct, thorough, and entirely unimpressed by Marshall's firm's reputation, which I found deeply reassuring. She told me what I needed. Tax returns for the last 7 years. Any accounts I had access to. Documented. Any property. Any assets. She told me to photograph, not remove. She told me to change nothing yet. She told me to be patient. I went home. I made dinner. Marshall told me the chicken was slightly overcooked. "You're right," I said. "I'll be more careful next time." He smiled at me. He said, "That's my girl." I smiled back. Over the following 6 weeks, I learned things. I had access to our joint filing account through the tax software we used. I printed 7 years of returns and kept them at Carol's house. I found 3 accounts I had not known existed, not hidden exactly, but arranged so that my name appeared on none of them. Money that had moved in a direction I had not been told about. I did not need to look for evidence of Renata. It found me on its own, in the form of a dinner charge at a restaurant I had never been to, on a night Marshall told me he had been working late. And then a hotel charge, brief, discreet, in a city where he had attended a conference alone. I photographed the statements. I sent them to Patricia. Carol had a conversation with a woman she knew, a woman who had worked as an administrative assistant at Marshall's firm for 9 years before leaving. This woman's name was Helen, and she met me for coffee one Thursday afternoon with the quiet composure of someone who had been waiting for exactly this conversation. She told me things. Not gossip specifics. Dates. Patterns. Renata had been there for 2 years. There had been someone before Renata. Helen had watched the whole architecture of it, quietly, from her desk. And she had her own reasons for wanting the record to exist. She gave me a folder. I drove it directly to Patricia. The thing about planning a departure, when the departure has to be total, is that it clarifies everything. Every dinner I made, I was thinking about square footage and asset schedules. Every event I organized, I was calculating what was mine and what I had simply been allowed to touch. I had given 11 years to a life that had been designed to look like partnership and function like ownership. The morning came on a Thursday. Marshall had a full day of depositions. He would be downtown from 8 in the morning until at least 6 in the evening. I had confirmed this 3 times, through the shared calendar he had stopped paying attention to because I had always managed it for him. Carol came at 9. I had arranged for a moving company not local, not anyone connected to anyone in Ashford Hills. They were professional, fast, and entirely focused. I had a list. I had walked through the house the previous Sunday, while Marshall was golfing and tagged, in my mind, exactly what was mine. The desk from my studio that had belonged to my mother, the drafting table I had bought with my first paycheck at the firm, 12 years ago, my grandmother's quilt, the prints from my travels before I met Marshall, my professional files, my licenses, my portfolio. I also had, thanks to Patricia, a detailed accounting of what I was legally entitled to, and it was considerably more than a desk and some prints. Patricia had been very thorough. By 1 in the afternoon, the truck was loaded. Carol stood in the empty studio doorway with 2 cups of coffee, and I stood next to her, and we looked at the clean rectangle of wall where my grandmother's quilt had hung for 11 years. "Are you ready?" Carol said. "I have been ready for 6 weeks," I said. The divorce papers, along with a letter from Patricia's office, were placed on the kitchen island, the same island where Marshall had sat with his bourbon the night he told me dinner was late. The first night I had heard the word sweetheart become a small, quiet weapon. I left him the cookbooks. I stayed that night at Carol's house, in her guest room with the yellow curtains, and I slept better than I had slept in years. Marshall called at 7:15 that evening. I watched the phone. I let it ring. He called 5 more times. Then he called from his partner's phone, which I did not recognize, and I answered it by accident, and his voice came through the line. And it was a voice I had not heard from him before, flattened, stripped of its usual shape. "Diane," he said. "What have you done?" Not a question. A statement. "I've retained Patricia Holloway," I said. "Her contact information is in the letter." I hung up. The mediation began 10 weeks later, in a conference room in the city where Patricia practiced. Marshall came with 2 attorneys from outside his firm. He had the sense to know that using colleagues would create complications. He wore the charcoal suit. He sat across the table and looked at me with an expression I recognized from years of client dinners: controlled, patient, faintly amused, and I knew he had decided this was manageable. Patricia laid the documentation on the table. The accounts. The transfers. The timeline. Helen signed statement she had agreed to provide one, in the end. The hotel charges. The full picture, assembled with the precision of someone who had done this exact work for 30 years. The faint amusement left Marshall's face somewhere around the 3rd document. His attorneys asked for a recess. During the recess, Carol and I sat in the hallway on a bench near the window. Outside, the city moved in the ordinary way it moves, indifferent to everything happening on the 4th floor. Carol had brought a thermos of tea. She poured me a cup without asking. "You know," she said, "the first time I sat across from someone in that kind of room, I thought I needed to be louder. I thought I needed to push." "What did you learn?" I said. "That the documents speak," she said. "You just have to show up." When we went back in, Marshall's attorneys made an opening offer that was, Patricia told me afterward with professional neutrality, not serious. We did not counter. We simply moved to the next document. It took most of the day. By 4 in the afternoon, the settlement included the following: a fair division of the marital assets, including the accounts I had not been told about. A buyout of my share of the Birchwood Lane property, at current market value. My full retirement contributions, correctly calculated across 11 years. And one additional item that Patricia had added and Marshall's attorneys had not initially noticed until it was too late to renegotiate: my architectural portfolio and all associated intellectual property, including the work I had contributed, without credit, to 3 projects the firm had taken on as Marshall's family connections. I had not known about that last part until Patricia found it. I had spent 11 years not knowing the full value of what I had. When the final signatures were placed, Marshall looked up from the table. It was the first time in the entire day that he looked directly at me, not at the papers or his attorneys. He said nothing. There was nothing, I think, that his training had prepared him to say. I said nothing either. I had already said everything I needed to say, and none of it required his presence to be true. Patricia walked me to the elevator. Carol was waiting in the lobby with her coat and her thermos, and the particular expression of a woman who has seen a great deal of the world and is neither surprised nor disappointed by any of it. Dinner? She said. Absolutely, I said. We went to a restaurant on the river, and I ordered the good wine without looking at the price, and Carol ordered the same, and we ate and talked about everything except Marshall, because there was no longer any particular reason to talk about him. On the way home, I thought about the studio in the house on Birchwood Lane, the clean rectangle of wall, the empty corners. I thought about the drafting table now set up in the apartment I had rented near the river, with the north-facing windows I had looked for specifically. I thought about the message I had received 3 weeks earlier from a woman I had worked with years ago, asking if I would be interested in collaborating on a project, a small mixed-use building downtown, if I ever found myself with time. I had written back and said I had time. There are things I know now that I did not know at 29. I know that attention can be a form of possession. I know that someone can make you feel seen while they are learning exactly how to make you small. I know that a life can be renovated around you so gradually that by the time you notice, you have forgotten what the original floor plan looked like. I also know this, you remember. Somewhere underneath the practiced smiles and the dinner party laughter and the years of making yourself quieter and smaller and more convenient underneath all of it, you remember exactly who you were before someone decided to edit you. The morning after mediation, I went to my studio at 6 a.m., while the light was still blue, and the city had not yet decided to be loud. I set a cup of coffee on the corner of the drafting table. I unrolled the first set of plans for the downtown project. And I weighted the corners, and I stood there for a long time looking at the blank space at the center of the design, the space that had not yet been decided, the space that was still open. I picked up my pencil. I started drawing.